I'm giving you like no into my thing, other than this is my fictionalized memoir, Don't Jump, that I'm reading from. This is a little visual aid. So the girl in the story might look a little something like this. If I didn't make her up, that might be what she looked like. And also, the two people in the story might look a little something like this if I had to maybe think of what they might look like. Okay, so Don't Jump is my fictionalized memoir. Yeah. And you don't really need to know anything today for what I'm going to read, because we're just jumping into, we're going back, and while I'm going back, before I go there, I just want to say that I connected over the summer with a boy that I knew when I was 12, and I had not seen him for 43 years. And he found me on Facebook. You gotta love the Facebook. And I've gone through, thank you, 3 name changes since then, and he found me anyway. And he shot those pictures of me that are on Facebook right now. And Elaine and I were talking about it, and it's because he sees me the way he saw me then. God bless his soul. But anyway, he's a brilliant photographer. His name is Carlos Alejandro, and he lives out east, but he comes here, and he's extraordinary. Okay. He'll be here in 2 weeks. He's going to shoot with JC and I my pilot pitch. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Barry, for those of you who know what's going on in my book, Barry, the guy with the triangle, this is him, how he comes into my life 40 years. Into Andi's life. Her. That girl. Diamonds, daisies. That girl. Okay. As far back as I can remember, I was a cautious, play-it-safe, good girl, quiet and obedient, the seemingly perfect daughter. I allowed Cookie to mold me as she wished, which to my horror was almost always in sharp contrast to what I desired for myself. I coveted my best friend Marla's long blonde hair. Mine was brown, and Cookie insisted on a Prince Valiant. Short cuts were fashionable, but I was no Jean Seberg. I had baby fat and lacked cheekbones. I was 6. I was the kid that always had a sweater when the other kids were in shirt sleeves, the one wearing tights when all the other girls were in knee socks. Afraid to skate, to bicycle, always hedging my bets. If there wasn't a rail or someone to hold on to, I just didn't try. My brother Jeff was the antithesis of me. Fearless, wild, and athletic, he and his bunch of crazy friends were always looking for trouble, torturing me whenever possible. He played on my fears and vulnerability. Luring me into a game of cards, he'd choose knucks, forcing me to continue until he drew blood. He noogied me until I had bumps all over my head, and he inked in the ears of my Patty play pal. Even though I had Marla, she had Jenny. Marla was my best friend, and I seemed to be hers sometimes, but at other times she leaned to Jenny, and I was crushed. The 3 of us often played together, but I was always the odd man out. They both had more clothes, more toys, and long hair. We lived in the Bronx, a few blocks from Yankee Stadium. In those days, the Grand Concourse was a middle-class Jewish neighborhood. Cookie and Jerry were the ideal couple, young, good-looking, and happy. I have the 8mm films to prove it. When I was 8, they took a bold step and moved us to Howard Beach, Queens, suburbia. It was 2 family homes, no apartments as far as the eye could see. That was the shit back then. I don't know how they afforded the 3-bedroom, 2-bath rental home, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I no longer had to share a room with Jeff. I could close my door and the torture would stop. Yet I was nervous having a big room to myself that bordered the backyard, which had a creek running through it. About a week after we moved in, Jeff told me that rats lived in the creek. And they liked to come through the windows and bite kids on the neck. I slept with the covers rolled tight under my chin until we left that house. We played in the street out front with the other kids on the block. Good Humor, Bungalow Bar, Chow Chow Cup, and the Carvel truck drove by nightly in the warm weather. Times were different. It was before missing kids appeared on milk cartons. We walked to school without supervision and came home to our housewife mothers who had the cookies and milk waiting. When my Uncle Henry was getting married, he asked me to be a junior bridesmaid. I got my first grown-up nylon stockings and small, but high for an 8-year-old, heeled shoes. A few weeks after the wedding, Sheila Lipschitz's mother complained to mine that they had a bar mitzvah to go to, and she didn't want to spend all the money on an outfit. They lived in a big house, and Sheila had every doll and toy imaginable. It's not like they were poor. Without a word, Cookie went into my closet, took my precious gown, nylons, garter belt, and shoes, and handed them to Mrs. Lipschitz. I wailed, locking myself in my room, trying to understand how she could betray me that way. I never got any of the stuff back. In retrospect, I can appreciate the thriftiness of Cookie's choice. Yet the way it was done, without discussion or explanation, was so painful. Those clothes represented a coming of age. As carefully as I had chosen each article and cherished owning them, it contrasted so stunningly with how swiftly and thoughtlessly they were taken away. With Cookie, unconditional love, or conditional love, was business as usual. I was forever disappointing her. Therefore, it was always okay for her to change her mind and take back. As a child, it was devastating. It doesn't feel too good as an adult either. One day when I was about 10, I remember walking to the ocean from my aunt's cottage in Atlantic Beach. My mother looked down and began to laugh. You have your father's toes. Look how long they are. I hid my feet for years after that. When I was 11 in a new home, going to a new school, knowing no one, she bought me a puppy. Without instruction, she expected me to train and care for him. When a week after he was still peeing on the newspaper in the house, she took him away while I was at school. Again, without a word. On my wedding day, as my mother helped me with my makeup, she kindly pointed out that my eyes were different sizes. As I walked down the aisle, instead of focusing on all that awaited me, I thought instead of my freakish right eye. It's amazing the things we remember. Oh, the stories Jack and Sid will one day be sharing. My parents were the ideal couple. Young, attractive, well-liked. They were the centerpiece among a large social circle of other young couples with children. I remember laughter, parties, large frequent family get-togethers. It was very Donna Reed, except Jeff was no Paul Peterson. Sitting at the kitchen table one Thursday evening when I was 9, I could see my mother's reflection in the mirror as she put her makeup on in the bathroom. I was eating a vanilla cone with peppermint dip from the Carvel truck. Where are you going? I asked. To the doctor. Why? To talk. About what? About Daddy. The good part or the bad part? Without waiting for a reply, I continued, are you getting a divorce? Expecting a quick, of course not, she instead began to cry. Filled with dread, without even knowing what made me ask, I now knew the terrible secret she'd been keeping. The world started spinning around me. Somehow I knew that life would never be the same. My ice cream cone fell to the floor. To this day, the smell of peppermint makes me nauseous. Flashing to the previous Mother's Day, Dad had given her a present on his way out to play tennis. Something bland and unromantic. I remember my mother's disappointment. Had that been the beginning of the end? I couldn't remember any other clues. They never fought, not that I'd witnessed. They danced like Fred and Ginger. They drank martinis and smoked cigarettes. I guess there were signs. The previous summer, I was forced to go to sleepaway camp for the month of July, where my mother had taken a job as a counselor. My father and brother went to the Catskills as usual, only this time, without us. I joined them in August with my mother. Well, my mother remained at the camp for the rest of the summer, and that should have been a tip-off that something was wrong, but I was so young. Jeff insisted on living with Dad. I fought to have the same privilege, but Cookie wouldn't hear of it. Whisked away from my father and brother and what had become of our new home, I moved to a small apartment on the other end of town with my mother. Only I never saw her. She took a job and I became a latchkey kid at 9. Too far away to play with my friends, living with my mother was tantamount to being alone. Not only was she barely physically present, she was emotionally unavailable as well. On November 9th, 1965, barely 10, I walked home from school alone, as was now the norm, and let myself into the apartment. The days were short. It was already getting dark as I started eating greasy Wise potato chips out of the bag, watching dark shadows on TV. The picture slowly started to fade, then flickered and went off. Just as I was rising to check it out, the entire apartment went dark, pitch black. Even the streetlights were out. I thought about the shelter drills at school. Did the Russians bomb us? Groping around for the front door, afraid to go outside, I was more terrified to stay inside alone. Slowly turning the knob, I peeked. We lived on the main floor of an apartment building directly across from the entrance. The super was in the lobby cursing in Spanish. As his flashlight beam swept by, he must have caught my eye, and he doubled back and walked towards me. "Where's your mommy?" "Working," I said, trying hard not to cry. "What time does she get home?" He was taking his time, speaking very deliberately. I knew he was trying to comfort me, and I was grateful for his effort. "What happened?" I asked, not really sure I wanted to know the answer. "It looks like a blackout." I stared at him blankly. He assured me the lights would no doubt come on in no time, although his face held no such promise. People were congregating in the lobby as I remained frozen in the doorway, trying desperately to figure out what to do. What if my mother got stuck in an elevator somewhere? Or worse, what if she never came home? As the gravity of my situation began to settle in, the tears flowed. A heavy-set grandma type must have heard and slowly inched towards me, as if not to frighten me further. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, I saw behind her the silhouette of my mother, highlighted by the edge of the flashlight beam. Running, I threw my arms around her. She thanked the women and led me inside. Conflicting emotions bubbled to the surface at once. Anger. How dare she leave me alone? Sadness. I was sure I was the only child in New York City without a mommy when the lights went out. Fear. What if it happened again? Anguish. How could I ever come home alone again? Despair. Why couldn't I live with Daddy and Jeff? Shock. I ran into my mother's arms for comfort. We were like two Barbie dolls, stiff arms, outstretched, unable to connect. We'd never been comfortable being physical with each other. Now terrified to come home by myself, I really started working on Cookie to let me live with Daddy and Jeff. She refused to listen. I couldn't understand why she fought so hard to keep me. Usually she'd fix dinner and I'd go to my room and watch TV while she read in the living room. I can't remember ever spending the evening together except for a few rare nights when we went shopping at Corvette's and maybe to Howard Johnson's for some fried clams and a frankfurter. Sometimes for a real treat, she took me to the Chinese restaurant on 108th Street for spare ribs, egg roll, and fried rice, which came to the table in high-stem silver dishes with domed lids. Did she keep me with her so that she wouldn't have to eat dinner alone? In no small measure, I think she did. Dad, no longer able to bear the constant reminder of the life he no longer lived, moved with Jeff to an apartment in Pelham Parkway, a much nicer section of the Bronx than the concourse. It had tree-lined streets and lots of like-minded Hebrews. Even though I only saw Jeff and Dad on the weekends, I always knew they were close at hand, just in case. But they were now in another borough. It might as well have been the moon. Dad called every night and picked me up from school on Fridays. I dreamt of that moment all week. I woke up on Sundays with a feeling of dread. I hated them. I could barely enjoy the day, so filled with grief at the thought of leaving him. My dad did all he could to distract me, filling the days with fun. As soon as he got home from teaching Sunday school, we'd head out to a movie, a walk in the park, ice skating, something great. Yet the inevitable loomed. My stomach always flipping, tears welling just on the other side of my lids. We'd hold hands, walk arm in arm, anything to stay connected. He knew how miserable I was without him. He felt my pain, and surely had his own to deal with too. One Saturday, we went shopping at a hip store on 8th Street in Greenwich Village. My dad was very cool, handsome, dating young women, singing in the Catskills, at the top of his game. After trying on a bunch of outfits, I helped him pick out a fashionable, at the time, pair of white bell-bottom pants, matching turtleneck, and a gold medallion necklace. He still wears those pants. Thankfully, not the medallion. As hip as my dad was in the 60s, he sort of got frozen there. Walking down the street arm in arm later that afternoon, he and his new duds, he took me to see Play It Again, Sam on Broadway, starring Woody Allen and Diane Keaton, snagging front row seats. Days like that gave me a sense that Jerry was flush. He was a sport, a big spender. I had no clue that he was living beyond his means and barely making ends meet. Cookie countered by taking a job as a traveling saleswoman for Revlon. She moved me in with her brother Henry, his new wife and baby, on Long Island. Now even further from my dad. I was inconsolable. At Henry's Levittown two-story track house, Cookie and I shared the attic bedroom, only she was barely there. I felt like Sarah Crew, unloved and unwanted. Basically, I was living with Henry and Jill, his young bride, who understandably resented my intrusion on their new marriage. It never dawned on me that maybe my mom needed someone to watch her kids so she could go make a living. The $15 a week that Jerry paid in child support afforded little even back then. All I could see was my hatred for mean old Cookie. She abandoned me in suburbia, in someone else's home, where she barely slept, just to keep me hers for the rare times she was around. I began to get sick. A lot. Mr. Green, my fifth grade teacher, spent his days chewing the ends of his tie and speaking unintelligibly. Between my extensive absences and lack of mumble comprehension, I was in danger of being left back. Appreciating the gravity of the situation, during the summer, Cookie moved us to the Bronx into a little basement apartment across the street from Dad and Jeff and Barry, my ticket to heaven. Prince Valiant haircut segued to the Twiggy. The coif didn't alter much, but everything else sure did. Mrs. Smith, my sixth grade teacher, sat me front and center. Focusing on my strengths, she romanced me out of my shell. Always painfully shy, this is about me, I flourished under her tutelage. For the first time, I loved going to school. Good grades fed my previously non-existent self-esteem. Social popularity was a welcomed byproduct. Barry and Joey were the first to befriend me. Outgoing and fun, they made a point of paying attention to the new girl, inviting me to walk to and from school with them. Once again, coming home to an empty house, Cookie softened the blow by enrolling me in after-school classes twice a week at a local community center. I signed up for Cookie. They gave me drama. There are no accidents. When I walked into the theater, there sat Barry, looking as surprised and happy to see me as I was to see him. Howard Dent, the acting coach, sensed something in me, a sadness, a knowingness, and helped guide me to shape it. He awakened what he encouraged me to believe was my life's purpose. Watching my every move, listening to my every word, he cast me as the lead in everything. Barry and I co-starred in school plays and community theater for the next 4 years. The days contrasted sharply with the nights. When my mother got home from work, she'd read the paper in her room while I did homework in mine. Then we'd both go watch TV, Peyton Place, or some other adult show, but not together. I did so alone in my bedroom with the contrast on dark and the sound low so she wouldn't get wise. I ached for love and attention. Cookie showed me neither. I guess she was lost in her own loneliness. I sprouted boobs and got my period exactly on my 13th birthday. With the blood came a set of balls. Yeah. I smoked, or should I say, choked my first cigarette. I took to sneaking them daily from my mom's purse. Seeking peer acceptance and affection, I searched in all the wrong places. Solely attracted to emotionally unavailable bad boys, even at 14. If it's true that we seek the familiar, particularly our mothers, I was adhering to the stereotype. Barry was adorable, attentive, and crazy about me, but all I wanted was Ray Santo. Ray was tall, dark, handsome, and completely dismissive. I had a crush on him all through junior high, in between my summers spent obsessing about inattentive Alan. Never part of the in crowd, I'd always been on the outside looking in. Pot and sex afforded me the change I was seeking. More fun and less afraid, my popularity grew. Cookie kept reading her paper, not seeming to notice the change in me. My dad continued to treat me as his good girl, and I did nothing to dissuade the myth. We all lived in denial, a long way from Egypt. Emotional day. It's one, like I was saying that each month it's different because sometimes like everybody's healthy and they bring salads and fruit. Today everybody brought sugar. Everybody's having their period except me because but I mean it's sugar. And we're all reading like emotional things. It's one of those kind of days, huh?